a hope that by the time this competition gets to the level of nationals or even state, some more movement may be allowed and things might open up with the vaccines coming out and people having a chance to fight this COVID and recover from it better than ever before. We don't know. I don't know if it's going to have to all be online. It may, but what if things trend in a much better direction and things open up? And it would just be a fabulous, fabulous thing if some of those good signs started to happen, because you guys have a tremendous opportunity in front of you, and you're ready to take it, and that's really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So what I want to do is just have some of our contestants go ahead and just, introduce yourself, and then what are your early initial ideas? Just like, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking I'm doing a website on this or whatever. Just kind of throw out those earliest ideas. And remember, there's no pressure. We hopefully the thought process is moving us forward at this point, because we are getting a later start than what we normally would. But I do believe with about the 12 weeks or so that we have, that we're going to be able to pull this off no problem. Maybe closer to 10 weeks because of the deadlines. But Emma Hulst, I'm going to have you go ahead and start.
Okay. So hi, I'm Emma Hulst, and I was thinking to do a website again, like I did last year. And along the topic, I was thinking something about how media in the past, I think in the 50s and 60s, has impacted the stereotypes that were put on women at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I've gone back and forth a little bit with Emma on email, and I she was debating whether or not she was going to try to do an essay or if she was going to go back to the website. And I think that for your topic, one of the things that I had mentioned is the visual aspect of how media has communicated those stereotypes. And I think it's going to be a really neat deal that you're going to be moving forward with. And so I'm just excited to see how it all develops. I always think of these old Life magazines, that have the ladies in their dresses and high heels, right, vacuuming their vacuuming their living rooms and so on. So I think that's great, Emma. And any, and maybe we'll circle back to this, but just, any insights that you can bring to this are greatly appreciated, because, especially you are in a unique position because of the pandemic. During quarantine, when we were meeting, it was just one of those odd situations that you were able to adapt to. So, insights with that as well, I think would be greatly appreciated with some of our others here. All right, so we'll move over to, let's see, Zoe, go ahead, introduce yourself, and just what are your initial thoughts here in terms of the direction you're thinking about going? Zoe, can you hear me? Yeah, I'm just gonna, so go ahead and unmute yourself and just introduce yourself, and then what are your earliest initial thoughts, possible topics, and then what type of project are you thinking about?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
What?
I'm Zoe, and I'm thinking something about like women in sports or in government, how they haven't been noticed, and how in the beginning they didn't, men did not want women to run. So I think something around running and sports or government. I'm kind of back and forth. And then I think I might want to do either a website or an essay.
Awesome. And I think, after I go through a little bit of info here, hopefully it'll clear things up just in terms of the direction that you can go as we try to fit these ideas around our themes and so on, because the theme is going to be that kind of driving force, I think, with some of the decisions that you make. So thank you. All right. Let's see. Emma M.
Hi, I'm Emma M, and I was thinking about doing something around the Battle of Midway. So, because the theme is like communication, and I was thinking how the intelligence officers they intercepted like a Japanese coded message, and I was thinking about doing something about that. So yeah, but I don't know really what project I'm gonna do yet.
Yeah, and we'll start talking about those a little bit too, just in terms of just really trying to hone in on the talents, the things that interest you, right? So if you want to do something on iMovie, or if you actually want to build something or create a website, there's a lot of great resources out there. And like I say, just allow your interest to really kind of push you whatever direction it is that you're thinking about going, and that once you got that innate feeling of like, oh, hey, I want to learn more about how to make a documentary or how to make a website. Like, that's what drives this whole thing, is your curiosity and your interest. And I think you've got a really neat topic. And I think that'll fit well into that idea of communication. All right, Ben.
So my name is Ben Runscott, and my topic, it's going to be kind of general. It's just how are changing communications from things like mail to telegraph to social media has changed our expectations of political leaders like presidents and representatives and senators, things like that. I'm thinking I'm going to do a documentary because I have done some video editing type stuff, and I know how to do some of that. But I'm also leaning a little bit toward essay.
Well, again, I think that, this is going to, your interests are going to drive you. And I love the fact that you're utilizing this idea of what you've done in the past, right? And you've got some of that video editing experience. So I think that's a really, again, a good way to kind of allow this navigation of all these projects to happen. And if you do decide to go an essay, that's, again, I think that's just great. So what I want to do moving forward is I'm going to share my screen here. And I don't know if all of you have seen this, but I reposted it on Google Classroom. And I just kind of put together a resource sheet, okay? And what I'm going to do is I just want to make sure that we understand really what it's going to take. And we'll talk to Mr. Vosberg and Mr. Knopf just in terms of their experiences, and then Emma as well, just in terms of what's the reality of putting together a National History Day project. Some people can get a little nervous about just the workload, right? And it does have to be kind of this independent, self-driven piece with, of course, your resources readily available. Myself, Mr. Vosberg, Mr. Knopf, we're here. I look at us as kind of your wingmen, right? We're here to bounce ideas off of, to kind of send you in the right direction and give you new ideas about just how to think about some of these things and look at some of these things. And my goal here is once a week to put together a Zoom call or a meeting of some sort that we can figure out, just to talk about the different things that you're going to see throughout. So just talking about primary sources or secondary sources, talking about your process paper and your bibliography and those kinds of things, so that you know exactly what it is that needs to happen as this progresses, because this is most definitely one of these projects that you can't wait till the end. You simply cannot, because if you do, you won't compete at the level that you need to, because we're not having a history fair this year. You're going directly into that regional competition, and the goal is to really give them at this point in the competition the best project that you possibly can with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen so we get an idea of some of the things that we're talking about here, and just give you some ideas and hopefully even some new angles to look at this. Can I get a thumbs up? Can you guys see my screen? All right, perfect. So with this on the sheet, I posted this on Google Classroom. Some of you have seen this already. It just has some links on it that'll take you to some good resources. And I want to go over one of the resources. I found this. One of, but I would say arguably the most competitive state in National History Day is the state of Minnesota. And every year they really put together, their historical society really puts together a nice comprehensive idea of what the theme looks like and the different perspectives involved with that and some of the things that you'll have to do. So you have this available to you. And then I want to show you another resource that will allow us to kind of figure out exactly the direction we want to go with this. So kind of like our check-ins, right? And that's going to be part of this process as well. Now, like I said before, this is going to be something, that you're going to, I would argue you might want to look at every day. Just get some time to spend with your project and with your theme and with your research, because research is going to be that thing that eats up the most amount of time, because that really is the key to this. So when you look at this, you got a couple of, in their table of contents, we're going to look at the theme overview, just some reminders, and then some sample topics. And the idea behind looking at some of those sample topics is to allow you some different perspectives on what direction that you could go if your theme doesn't work out, or if your topic doesn't work out, or just looking at it from another direction. All right. So we're talking about just an overview of what we're looking at here, right? So your annual theme, we've talked about this, communication in history. They have it every year. They've got, when I started, it was conflict and compromise, and then triumph and tragedy, which I've got my my shirt on today. And then last year was breaking barriers in history. So this year, I think communication really lends itself nicely to the competition. Now, everybody has to stick by the theme, and tons of topics can connect. And that's one of those things that we want to keep thinking about. So this year we're talking about communication in history, the key to understanding. And again, we'll talk about, well, what does communication really mean with all of this, right? So when we talk about this, it's about how we share information and as well as what we say, right? So when we talk about this idea of sharing information, and I think, Ben, your idea really lends itself well to this, right? Process of using words, sounds, signs, or behaviors to express or exchange information or express your ideas, thoughts, and feelings, right? So again, thinking about, technology and the means of communication. And then what we are saying, a message that is given to somebody. And boy, can you go a lot of directions with that, right? So Emma, I'm thinking about your project with, this messaging that isn't necessarily overtly said in some of this advertising, but it kind of puts out an expectation, right? A message to people. So I think that, again, is one of those things to continue to think about. So we think about how people communicate, right? All of these different things. So there you are, Ben. We've got all these different ways that people have communicated over the years, right? And we see some of these things. And there's even ways that we can kind of drill down on some of this stuff as well, right? So technology or a means of communication. So it can go far beyond, I believe, just the technological piece, right? So we can look at speeches, monuments communicate things, right? Protests communicate things, art communicates things. So again, there's a lot of directions that we can go, I think, with this idea of communication in history. And I was talking to somebody that, unfortunately, they're not here right now, and hopefully they jump in, but talking about, how am I going to be able to fit this into the theme? And I have a feeling that when we put a few heads together, we could come up with a way to do that, right? So again, you start to see how broad we can get here with some of this idea of communication. So we talk about these different buckets in terms of the topics, right? Newer, different technology or ways to communicate. And then you've got people communicating through different ways and communicating specific messages. So that's kind of where we can start this if you're trying to figure out, okay, where do I fit in? What does my topic, how does that fit in, right? So Emma M., you were talking about, right, the communications and intercepting information and that kind of thing, right? The Enigma machine, it makes me think about that. I think they did a movie on that as well. But then you talk about some of the oldest, like you got the invention of the telephone, the Pony Express, right? Pony Express basically died as soon as the telegraph was put up across the country. And again, an effective way to communicate. And we just see that changing over time, right? You can get into a lot of different topics when we look at this. Just, it talks about political cartoons and just the way, protests and what people were saying through their artwork. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but you start to see, this one rings true for me, the parental advisory labels in music. That was when I was growing up. It was like, whoa, what's going on, and just do when that was a hot topic. So that's kind of neat as well. So just some things to think about moving forward. So overlapping, does that happen? Of course it happens, for sure. Right. So when we talk about different technologies and how people communicate, these things, they have inevitably, a lot of this stuff starts to overlap. So don't feel like you're like, well, what bucket do I go in? Either or. And Mr. Knopf and Mr. Vosberg, if you have anything to interject, or anybody, feel free to just pop in, and I won't feel bad about that. So if you've got any insights, feel free. So communication and your topic, right? So this is where we start to really get into, well, how am I going to present this? How am I going to have this historical topic be effectively, this story effectively told, right? So you start to think about the questions. Now, when we talk about historical analysis and when we talk about historical research, I've said this, you've all had me in class, that it's really nice to just have an idea of what you're looking for, having a question to be able to answer throughout your research. So the first one, what was the message? What are they trying to communicate? So how do you fit your idea into being able to answer this question and really dialing it down to this theme, right? Was it public or private? Whose beliefs or values were represented by it? So the more questions that we ask, the more opportunity you're going to have to navigate that into a specific area, right? Then we think about, well, why was it communicated, right? What were people trying to change or do? What other points of view were not represented, right? So again, you look at it, we have to look at it from multiple perspectives. That's one of our historical skills that we really try to push with this is, well, what were other people? Did everybody agree on this? Would everybody agree with your thesis on this, right? And if not, you need to bring that into the conversation, because we can't have this kind of tunnel of one perspective on a particular topic. History lends itself to understanding all perspectives, right? How was it communicated? So thinking about just the basics, right? Was it a secret code? Was it a law that was passed? Was it an advertisement, right, that we've talked about earlier? Why did the author choose this format? Was it effective or ineffective, right? So again, more questions around how it's communicated. And then probably one of the biggest, most important piece of this is, what was the impact, right? So what? This is a great story, but so what? What changed right away? What changed long term? Did the change affect all groups or individuals in the same way? So what was that impact? So these are great questions to ask yourself as you're going through some of this research. So communication in your topic, right?
Mr. Orr,
Yes, go ahead.
may I ask one question or just interject one thing on that previous screen?
Sure.
Yeah, right there. When you're choosing your topic, Mr. Vosberg, Mr. Oram, do you agree that the impact has to be enormous? It can't be something that is a blip on the screen that was an important or interesting thing or interesting topic, but it didn't really have much of an impact. I think the judges are looking for topics that do have an enormous impact on a nation or the world as a whole. Do you agree with that?
Yes, in the judging, once you see the judges' forms and stuff, which the students, you'll all see those, impact is a big piece of it. Yeah, we want to see your research, and we want to see how you put all your pieces together, what your thinking was. That's all really important, but then that ultimate piece is for you to show and demonstrate this was really important. This was significant in history. Because, so you can't just say it, yeah, this was an important thing, it happened. You got to explain it, dig in a little bit. And that analysis piece that you do, that's going to really sell it to the judges. So yes, I agree, Mr. Knopf. Impact is the biggie, but it's hard to get to that without all the other stuff. You've got to go through the process. But if you have that out there and you're thinking ahead of time, where you're looking to see where, what was the impact? What's the significance of all of this? If you have that up front in your thinking, you'll get there.
Absolutely. And that's, like I say, that piece, and I appreciate that idea of, you know, now you said on a national or a global level that impact, right? But then there are impacts, when you look at it, you can boil it down to smaller communities, because sometimes the impacts are different for all of them, right? So again, we see those different perspectives, I think, coming through with that idea of the so what piece of this. Did it affect other people differently, one group differently than another, right? So again, you go back to, if it's, did it affect men the same way it affected women, or people of color, or things like that, right? So again, you want to be thinking about all of those different facets and how to look at this when you're going through some of that.
I'll give you a quick example from last year along those lines, Mr. Orm. There was a project last year, it was breaking barriers, but it was all about, their focus was all about the music scene in West Michigan. They did their project on orchestras and people involved in taking traditional music and bringing it into the present. So the impact was huge for Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Traverse City. Didn't necessarily have a big impact elsewhere, but their project was very effective because they did really dig in and show the importance and significance in the communities they were addressing.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to make here. All right, so I'll move on to the next piece here. So again, when you're breaking it down, right, here's what we want to be thinking about. When you're, what was the message? How was it communicated? Why was it communicated, right? So this is like the research piece, the heart of the story. You're like, here's what we have. So this, when we look at National History Day, I want you to remember you're telling a story, right? And that's one of the things, and that really gets into that history research piece, right? Even if you think that some of the information you're giving is obvious, right? So Emma M., you talked about World War II and the Battle of Midway. Are you going to have to talk about who was fighting? Absolutely, right? So just, if you think like, oh, is this deep enough? Hang on to it, because you're going to have to tell those basics no matter what. Then you can start really dialing it down to pointing out why or how this is an impact of communication and those kinds of things. So again, remember, you're telling that whole story, and then you're really drilling down on those main points, and then getting to that impact of the communication, right? So again, don't be afraid to tell the story through, maps and in some cases advertising, and showing what maybe early communication technology looked like, or the role of women in sports prior to things like Title IX and that kind of stuff, because you want to have that whole story, and then really allow your thesis to really shine and come through in that larger story. As we move on, right? So here are just some ideas, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I've got this posted. You're more than welcome to look at it, but there's tons and tons of different ways to look at this, right? So we talk about the bonus army back in the 30s, right? World War I vets looking for their bonus. They kind of hung out. It was almost like an Occupy Wall Street kind of situation back in the day in the capital of Washington, D.C. You've got the Trail of Broken Treaties, right? So this is a piece of Native Americans really advocating for their rights and looking at the past in terms of treaties that had been broken over time, right? As we continue, there it is, the invention of the telephone. Everybody's around this guy, Alexander Graham Bell, right? Make quick communication across distances possible. And it's becoming even more global as we continue to talk about it. A big piece with Chairman Mao's Little Red Book, right? He's got, really being able to get his message out there effectively, those kinds of things. So again, you can tell a whole story around this book. Looking at people speaking out against things like apartheid. So now we're getting into some social justice pieces here, right? So in South Africa, you've got people communicating through, music and poems and things like that, sending a message, right? You see artwork as an example. How can, this tells the story of an event that took place, and Pablo Picasso does this to communicate something to people, right? And again, the impact of communication can come in a lot of different ways. So those are some things to consider. We see here, right, back in the 80s with the AIDS epidemic, how that was being a part of it, and how communication became this huge piece of that, particularly in the homosexual community and things like that, that were not as out there as they are today, right? And we all know Martin Luther King Jr., this letter from Birmingham jail. Wow, the impact of that, right? Communicating his thoughts and his ideas while sitting in jail. Amazing. We see some pieces here just in terms of communication between farmers and how that, so you really see the wide reach of the possibilities of this. Okay, so that, I just want to open your mind to how can we bring our ideas into understanding these full perspectives of communication. The first Earth Day, right? What, how, why, impact. So you go through this and it kind of gives you a little idea here why people are doing it. They want to save the earth, right? The impact of that, the Environmental Protection Agency comes out of these things. So again, you start to see that over time as well. So you look at it, right? It breaks it down. The what, communicate the need for environmental policies. The how, organize teach-ins and demonstrations. That's what they did to communicate this idea. Why? To protect the earth. The impact, well, we know that government agencies now are out there to try to do everything possible to protect our air and our water and our planet, right? So, a couple other things, right? We know history is not always positive, and that can really come into our stories as well. Was the communication clear and effective? Did it lead to greater awareness or understanding? And remember, it's not always positive. And that's just a fact. That's just how history works. When we reflect on these things, we know that there's some things in here that aren't always uplifting, right? But don't be afraid to include negative impacts in that, because that's part of the story. And so again, when you're getting to that, what is the impact, the so what, you're trying to prove your thesis, it doesn't always have to be shiny and positive. Okay, I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. The facts are the facts, and when you present them in a certain way, sometimes it doesn't come out always in an incredibly positive light. So just some reminders for you. So this is we'll talk about some of the things that you're gonna need to remember throughout the process. And so we'll talk a little bit about that here moving forward. So we're looking for a main topic that's at least 20 years old. And the reason why is because you don't really know the impact of something in the recent past, right? I had an example last year. I think this group really they were very passionate about it, but the problem is that it was such a new topic that they really didn't go into the roots of the things that led to this. They were really focused in on the Black Lives Matter movement, which I think when we talk about impact of things that came before Black Lives Matter, it's incredibly huge. But I said, hey, you could really look into some of the the history of the Black Panthers and how they were fighting for civil rights, and people had been fighting against police brutality for years and years and years. And it was a struggle for them to go back and see how those things laid the groundwork for the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, they put together an interesting and impactful project, sure, but did it really hit the idea of the history of this stuff? I don't think it did. It was neat to look at. I think it was impactful. I think it really sent a message, but historically, do we understand the impact of what they're doing, right? So again, think about some of those things. Focus on your topic, right? So the civil rights movement as a topic is too big for one history project. The civil rights movement's really just, I mean, it's huge, right? You talk about voting rights. You can talk about police brutality. You can talk about integrating schools and integrating public spaces, and you can talk about Jim Crow laws and all of those things. So you can dial some of these things down, right? You can focus in on one particular movement. You can focus in on those kinds of things. So think about it in that sense. Try not to be too broad with where you're at, right? So here's a way to look at it. Here's your theme. Here's what you're interested in. Here's your topic. And then you get to that specific thesis. Now, the challenge moving forward, and I would say this for everybody, is really try to dial down your topic, right? Some of us said, well, I'm talking about, women in sports and women in government. Now it's time to focus down and say, okay, that's pretty broad. What's the next step here to help us kind of really focus in on what we're going to be doing our project about, right? So I said before, like, it's okay to have the basic information out there, right? But now you got to really start thinking about dialing it in. And this is, so moving forward from here, I would say that is your goal right now. Boil it down, get that thesis, start researching that thesis, right? So short and long term, again, when we look at impacts, right, we can see these kinds of things. Lusitania was sunk by the Germans. It was a catalyst for getting the United States involved in World War I. And then we see some of the further impacts of that, right? The Lusitania was used to support anti-immigration feelings and things like that. So again, you're going to have to look at this from multiple perspectives. The Zimmerman telegraph was a secret communication message sent from Germany to Mexico saying, hey, Mexico, if you help us out and attack the United States, we'll look kindly on you. And the intended outcome versus the unintended outcome, right, is two very different things. And those are things, again, to look at when you're doing some of your stuff. Communication can be public or private, right? So most famously, the Diary of Anne Frank. I don't know that she would have thought that this would have been one of the most widely published books on the planet when she was writing these things. But boy, what a great insight this has. So when we look at some of our places to do our research, right, you're gonna be amazed at what's out there and the things that have been written down and the headlines that you're gonna find. And so again, does it have to be something that was a public outcry? No. There's going to be a treasure trove of information of people that are just writing down their thoughts and their personal experiences, right? That's what makes history so cool, are all these different facets that people bring in. You have, every time you put something out on the internet, you're adding to the historical record, right? That kind of stuff is really fascinating to me to really dive in and understand how history is different for everybody.
And Mr. Orm,
yes, sir.
The work that students are doing, it does become part of the historical record. It's made a difference over the years. It's brought people to trial. NHD projects cause people to be arrested and taken to trial. It's caused monuments to be built. It's brought people together. And as you're doing your research, you're going to see NHD projects will pop up as part of the research field that's available. Now, is that going to be your best source of information? Yeah, probably not, but it'll lead you to other places. So the work you're doing is contributing to the field of history. Absolutely. And that's, I think, when we talk about your own impact that your project is going to have, it's there. And one thing I found out about the National History Day organization is that it is wide reaching, it is large, and it is taken very seriously. And they when I say they, the people that really are organizing this thing, they're believers in this, and they believe in the work that you're doing and adding to the story that you're bringing forward in the story of history. So yeah, it's very, very important work and really neat. So here's one. What was the purpose? Was it to inform or influence, right? So you look at this, you got the original picture here on the left, and then you see how this guy was like, well, I don't know if people want to believe that native peoples had modern technology in their lives, right? So he changes this to kind of
keep this image that people had at the time, right, versus the truth. And so again, look at what is being put out there. And Emma, it makes me think of I keep going back to these advertisements, these things like, what is the intent? Was it to show that women need to do this? Were they trying to inform people, or was it that influential piece, right? Where, you get up and you're ready to go to a formal ball, but actually you're just going to be vacuuming your living room, right? It's just so odd to think about. So again, something to think about moving forward. Miscommunication, holy smokes, in this day and age, right? When we hear the term fake news, holy cow, what a real interesting way to start thinking about this, right? Polling and all that, we went through all this stuff with the last election. But again, how it's communicated through the media and what that looks like and how that can inform people or misinform them, right? So again, the impact of that is huge. And that's something that as historians, we need to be vigilant about. It's our job to really call out misinformation and prove that, right? Because no matter what, history is going to tell a story. And that's one of the things, that's one of the responsibilities here of National History Day, is to make sure things are accurate and we understand it and give that real story of what happened. Can be on purpose.
Just to comment on that, Mr. Orm. One of the things that is typical, I'm talking to the students now, you guys, as you do your research, this makes the topic particularly interesting this year, because you're going to discover fake news as you look for your resources and check your sources. It wouldn't be surprising for you to find opposing stories on your topic. Some that tell it one way and another source says this happened, and another one says, no, it happened this way, and they're going to conflict with each other. And a difficult job you have is to try to determine if they're both being honest in the story they're telling. Are they trying to tell what happened, or are they trying to tell you what to think about what happened? Are they trying to color it in a certain way to make you feel angry about somebody or upset about them? Or are they trying to tell you this is what happened and you get to decide for yourself what you think about it? It's very common to find two reports on the same event that disagree. Okay, that is not unusual. And that gets to the validity of your sources, the reliability of your sources. How reliable are they? And you will, where you go to find your information, something off the internet that's not sourced, doesn't really have a source, but this is an account of what happened, will not carry the same amount of weight as somebody who can say this was an eyewitness to the event, or this is something from the National Archives site, which is extremely reliable. Primary information, resources from the people themselves of the time period. So it's especially important when your topic is communication, or your theme is communication in history. It's you're going to see in your research how important that is, and how communication can be used to influence for good or for bad, maybe both. I don't know, Mr. Orm, if anybody is going to choose yellow journalism as a topic this year, but yellow journalism was newspapers purposely showing a group of people in a negative light for the purpose of creating a war. And that's a perfect example of how important communication is and how it can be used to influence so powerfully a nation that probably had no views about a particular group of people to feel negatively toward them. And it was not done accidentally, it was done on purpose. And that's the scary part about communication, is when it's done effectively, it can influence very, very strongly. And that's it can also be used for good to influence people very, very strongly. So that's something you're looking for in any topic you choose. You know, what is the purpose behind the communication? Who is sending it, and what is their agenda? That's what it's about.
Totally. And like I say, I can't underscore enough the responsibility that we have with that, right? And that's what's going to make you, that's where you're going to see the dividends paying off for you in the future. I suspect, most of the people that get involved with this are college bound, and this kind of thing, you will have a leg up moving forward of being able to, see what's out there, and like you said, finding a reliability in sources and things like that. So yeah, I appreciate that for sure. Miscommunication, you just said it could be on purpose, right? Leading nose and throat specialists suggest Philip Morris cigarettes, right? I mean, they called out the doctors saying, hey, this is what more doctors smoke, right? So again, the whole idea is to manipulate. So it's a form of, a lot of the time when you see this kind of thing, it's a form of propaganda that's used, and it's not by mistake. They do it because they know it's influential, right? And then that's one of the things that we look at historically of like, well, what's the motivation here? What are they trying to do? And bottom line is they're trying to sell cigarettes, right? I mean, that's it. So this is something I think is really important, and that's, not forgetting that things in the present, right, can be results of things that have happened in the past. And a lot of the time when we're inspired, and I think that happened with that example I gave earlier, the Black Lives Matter movement inspired these kids, right? They needed to take it to the next step of figuring out, well, where did this come from, and what, who are they inspired by? And you see these kids in Minneapolis organizing to remove police from schools. And then you look at the history. Well, are they the first people to do this? No, of course not. When you go back, you see the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That was students throughout the United States working to get people registered to vote, to really challenge a lot of the norms that were happening, particularly in the South, where segregation was legal at the time. So you see how the past really does influence the future, and how there's a story that leads up to the present. And when we understand that, and can look at the present and be like, oh man, the relevance of this is huge, right? So Ben, I think about yours, right? Like social media, never before has a president been able to use social media the way that Donald Trump has. And that's a new thing. Like when you have the ear of 70 million people, that's influential. That's big. But what were people doing before this, right? You think of FDR and his fireside chats, right? He was doing that, and people were glued to their TVs when he would do these things. And there's a reason why he did that, right? And you could go back even further with how information was communicated. So again, the stuff that's happening now definitely is relevant to most topics that you're talking about. Look at the history of current events, right? Democrats in Congress pushed for the Voting Rights Act, which John Lewis was working on for a time at the time of his death in July 2020. Not the first Voting Rights Act, right? We see here in 1965 with Lyndon B. Johnson, it was a huge piece, right, of getting voting rights, really making sure that it was clear about what constitutes a voter and that kind of thing. So again, there's a history involved with what people are doing and what they're renewing and what they're adding on to these things. There are a lot of stories involved with that. Perspective, we've talked about this, right? And this is, Emma, this goes to yours, right? Here's a copy of it, right? People going against women getting the right to vote in the suffrage movement, right? People were literally advertising against it. Like, right, if the women are out voting, who's going to take care of this kid? And you see this guy, well, he's not very happy. But again, this is such an interesting historical piece that can be used to really strengthen your argument. And that can be the hardest part sometimes, is understanding how is somebody else's perspective that doesn't go along with what I'm trying to prove, how does that impact my story and actually strengthen it, right? So again, your ability to kind of deconstruct what's going on with a different perspective and a source that points out that different perspective, there is a huge amount of impact for your particular topic. Like it's huge. And when you can bring that perspective in and deconstruct it to really help your narrative, boy, I'll tell you, there's impact there, and it's big. Okay. So again, you look at it from that multiple perspective. So again, ask the questions, right? Who created the message? What did they want to happen, right? So an anti-suffrage political cartoon shows those roles, right? Hey, what do we got here? And it really points out those things, those impactful images that they have. Who was the intended audience or for the message? What values or beliefs were represented in this message? So again, keep asking those questions to yourself, and then, boy, you've got really an impactful piece of history and a primary source that can really push your topic and your thesis to the next level. So again, don't be afraid. Not everybody's going to agree, and you want to use that to your benefit. So just some sample topics, right? So what makes a good topic? I think some of you have done this, and some of us are still in the process of narrowing it down, right? Many topics will work with this year's theme. I think we've talked about that. Here are some things that are embedded in here, and I would say, yeah, take a look at those. I'm not going to get into those today, but I would encourage you. And again, that's one of the things here is this self-led kind of thing. So get in here and take a look at some of this stuff. And I think that'll help you really be able to navigate where you're at with your topic, right? So again, it starts broad, and you're going to go down to very narrow and focus in on what story you want to tell and how you're going to prove that thesis. Digging deeper. This will be something that you will hear Mr. Knopf and Mr. Vosberg and myself say, okay, is that, hey, we're digging deeper. And how much deeper can you go? Where else what else can you dig up about this, right? We're always going to push to do that more research, to dig a little bit deeper. And it might get to a point of annoyance, but we promise you that is a big, big deal. How can you dig deeper in your topic? And that's just something, where else can we go with this? What else can we look at? What were the other perspectives? All of that. We're going to ask those questions. When you feel like you've really, oh man, I've got all these primary sources and secondary sources, you're going to hear one of us go, so what else can we do? And don't find that to be demoralizing. We're pushing you to as far as you can take this, okay? Because we want you to be as competitive as possible and really, really, really have your project shine. Okay. So again, it's not that we think you're not doing enough or anything like that, but we are here to push you. And that's going to be something that again, don't take it as I'm not doing enough. You are, you're going to be doing great, but we're here just for those nudges forward. Right. And that's really what it comes down to. Let me see here. A couple more slides. So different topics, look at all these different facets, right? We've talked about this a bit: social, military, artistic, environmental, political, legal, cultural, scientific, economic, technological. I think most of us fit somewhere in there. So again, very broad, and it's time to dial it down, right? That's what you need to start thinking about as next steps. Political history, so there you are. Zoe, here's some great stories, right? The first one that came to mind when you said women in government, Shirley Chisholm, what a cool story she's got. Unbought and unbossed, right? I mean, it's an amazing story about her running to be president, and it's really a neat story. So again, just some things like that. Margaret Chase Smith calling out Joe McCarthy, when he was trying to root out communists throughout the American government and beyond. So just some things to think about. Arts and literature, right? Holy cow. Books, the impact of books. Live Aid, what a neat topic that could be, especially, I think of that new movie with about the band Queen, right? I mean, that was like their swan song. Live Aid, holy smokes, the impact of that. When we say 40% of the world's population watch something, that's going to be impactful, right? Sports and leisure, here's Arthur Ashe bringing awareness to the AIDS epidemic. The game Monopoly, you may not know that this was a way to show the disparity between the wealthy and the have-nots, right? And those that weren't so wealthy. I had no idea that that was the history of that. What a cool story to tell. Pop culture, right? Sesame Street helps kids get ready for school, but holy cow, they talked about tons of different issues. And you know, it's one of those things that, you know, on the surface, do we see all this stuff? We see, you know, artists advocating for other artists, right? Prince was one of those. I remember Pearl Jam going in front of Congress to you know, make their music more accessible to people. Military history, lots of things that you can look at in here, right? Maybe not looking at the Yugoslav civil wars per se, but nonetheless, did you know that that was a thing? Leaflet bombs during the Korean War, right? Propaganda campaigns and those kinds of things where literally a bomb would drop leaflets that had messages on them. Legal history. Again, this is the guy that, you know, with the Volstead Act and prohibition, we look at how the impact of this woman with some of the lawsuits that happened during the civil rights era and the impact that they had. Science and technology, right? We talk about the Apollo projects here, and the Scopes trial, and you know, teacher getting in trouble for teaching evolution. What unbelievable topics that you can get into. Environmental history, you know, this can go a lot of directions, and boy, you talk about impact for today, right? What an amazing thing. Social movements, protests, there's a place in my heart for this stuff, but nonetheless, what a neat topic, right? We talk about women workers in Iceland, and for the people that are doing things on the rights of women and the impact of women throughout history, there's a lot of that stuff out there. Malcolm X, you know, huge impact with the speeches that he gave and the messages that he put out there. Local history, right? So this could come down to, there's a lot of history here in Holland. This one happens to be about redlining and racial restrictions, right? The covenants that communities had to keep people of color out of particular neighborhoods and things like that. You know, that hits close to home with me. My brother, when they sold his wife's grandfather's home, there was a racial slur literally on the deed of the house. It said, this house can't be sold to this group of people. And it kind of blew my mind. I was like, what are we talking about here? Local history, things are happening all around us, right? So again, you know, here's some World War II info about the impact of Japanese in the war and communication, right? So really interesting. And Emma M, it makes me think about where you're at with your project and the idea that you've got going on. So this is where we're at, okay? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because boy, did we just go through a lot of information. So the idea here is to simply get the ball rolling, okay? The next steps, I would say, are start narrowing down your thesis. Come up with what story you're gonna tell specifically, right? So with that thesis is, this is what I'm trying to prove. This is what my research is helping us to understand and answer. So that's going to allow you to dial it down, right? And and like I said, this presentation, I've posted it on our Google Classroom page. Mr. Vosberg, Mr. Knopf, I'm going to get you in on there as well. And I can't tell the four of you enough how important communication is with the people here. You can throw it out to the group. You can be specific with talking to Mr. Knopf and Mr. Vosberg or myself. And I'll tell you, doing that's it's gonna relieve some of the pressure that's going to build at certain points. It's gonna help with just where you're at and reassurance of what you're doing. And it's gonna help if you get stuck. Because if you get stuck, you need somebody to help you through that door, right? Because those things happen, and that's just how some of this works. That if you're sitting there and you're like, oh man, I feel like I'm getting nowhere, step away from it. Give yourself a breather for a moment, right? Let yourself regroup. Don't let this drive, the possibility of just like consuming all of your time and all of that. Is it going to be considerable amount of time? For sure. I'm not going to, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Is it going to take you time? For sure. But if you're spending, a bit of time each day finding some new sources and mulling through those things and starting to organize that information, you're going to have a product at the end that's fantastic. And again, make sure that you're communicating those things. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is just, I won't show you that today. We'll go back to it. But the next meeting, I'm thinking at least once a week I want to meet. Okay. And it won't be as involved as this, but it'll be like, all right, where are we at? How are we moving forward? And keep an eye on the Google Classroom page, because I have a tendency to post just links to resources and things like that throughout. And then what I think, because we're going back face-to-face next week, I do want to get together and talk to everybody then. And we'll figure out a time, and I'll talk to Ben and Emma M and Zoe, and then Emma, I'll shoot you an email just to keep you in the loop, or I'll put something out on Google Classroom on what time would work best if we want to do a face-to-face. And no worries about socially distancing and all that. We'll take care of all of that if we do meet face-to-face and those kinds of things. But we'll just figure out what we want to do. Do we want to just do a Zoom meeting and we get everybody there and it's easiest to do it that way? I do want to meet over the break. It's one of those things. I've always in the past opened up my room for people that want to come in and work on projects. It's going to be a little different this year. But what I want to do is give you an opportunity to share what you're finding and that kind of thing. Okay, and just bounce ideas off people. And what do you think about this? Because I just want it to be an open forum for everybody here, just of like, yeah, we're in this together and we're going to work with you to help you be successful. Okay. Hi, Miriam. Hey, I videotaped this whole thing. Okay, so I'll post that out there for you. I know you're probably like, what I miss? No worries. We've got it videotaped for you. So I'll also make sure I send that along to you. All right, Emma Halst, words of wisdom for our newbies. What did you learn from last year, and what can these kids anticipate moving forward?
So one big thing is to make sure you're picking a topic that really interests you and you're sure you're going to be interested in it, possibly until like June. So I know with my group last year, since we had a group, we had to do a lot of compromising on the topic, and I wasn't necessarily interested in it much at the end. So make sure that you pick a topic that you're sure will be interesting. And I know this year there's no groups or anything, so you don't have to worry about compromising on that. And another thing is, I think I'm doing a website. I'm just going to warn you, the software isn't the best quality. Like, it's really kind of hard to navigate and involves a lot of work just to figure it out, let alone putting more stuff in it. And then a couple other like tips that we did last year that found helpful is we made like a to-do list each week of like specific things that we wanted to get done, and then we'd mark it off so everyone would know exactly what was going on. And then also keep a document like with every source you find and like just a short summary of it, so it's easy to find everything if you need to go back for like a quote or for your bibliography at the end. Those are things I thought of just off the top of my head.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just to reiterate what she's saying, right? So there's a couple of things moving forward that I'll just reinforce what Emma was saying. First, start documenting your process, because one of the things that you're going to have to do is create a process paper. Okay, and that means like, well, how did this whole thing come to be? Right? When they say a diary of sorts, that's what this is. And it's a good idea. Every time you sit down and you interact with, maybe you're doing an interview with somebody, maybe you've done some research, you spent the last hour in the National Archives, write down what you're finding, write down your frustrations, write down the way you're communicating with others on that, right? Because part of it is that the judges want to know, like, where did you start and how did you end up where you are with your finished product? So I always suggest get a running Google Doc, throw dates on there and just be like, today I went through the National Archives. I found something really interesting. It kind of threw me for a loop and made me rethink what I was doing, right? And that's okay. Document that stuff. Keep a diary essentially going, because then what you're going to have at the end when you need to put your process paper together, you're going to have that whole experience documented already. The other thing, again, to reiterate what Emma was saying, any and all sources you come by, make sure you know where to find them. Make sure you've got a list, because one of the things is what we call an annotated bibliography. It tells us here's where I got my information, and it also tells us how we're using that information in our project. Even if you don't use a particular source, keep it, okay? Make sure you've got it. So again, that's gonna alleviate a ton of anxiety at the end going, I have to finish building this, and I got to make sure I've got these two pieces together. When you've already started those pieces, there's not going to be nearly as much pressure at the end to be like, I got to quick get this stuff done. So keep that running. And that's going to be what I would say between now and the next time that we meet. I want you to start looking for some primary sources and some secondary sources, okay? Documentaries. I love watching documentaries. If you want to get a broad overview of your topic with something and there's a good documentary out there on it, what a great place to start. And then you can start digging into some of those sources and things like that. So I think really the big goal for us moving forward is narrow down your thesis. What is it you're going to be doing your project on specifically, right? So if we're here right now, we need to bring it down to here. Okay. And then the other thing is start getting some sources. See if you can come up with 2 or 3 to start with, right? How easy is it to find this info, right? If you're really stuck on where to look and you're having trouble finding some sources, that's when you want to be like, okay, do I need to reconsider what I'm talking about, right? Because as we move forward, now is the time. We're diving in. And we're going to say, all right, here's how we move forward. So, Mr. Vosberg, Mr. Knopf, any last words you want to impart here as we wrap things up today?
Have fun. You're in for a great learning adventure. You really are. But have fun along the way. This is good stuff. You're going to learn some amazing things. Enjoy it.
I would just add, and I know, Mr. Orem, you've talked about the site for NHD where they can see what other students have done in the past. I might look through and see if there's something similar to what they're thinking about doing, and if it's a website, look at a website that was done by a middle schooler on a World War II topic. If your topic is a World War II midway topic, maybe there's something that somebody else has done that'll give them an idea, or like you said before, ideas for sources and places to look for information. When you look at if they've done a documentary, there's got to be a research paper with it, or their the paper that they've done with it in the annotated bibliography. Those are very helpful in, I didn't even think to look in that place. Let me look that up. It's good to see also when you look at what somebody else has done, try to find what their thesis statement is. If their thesis statement should be clear and obvious in the projects that have done well at nationals, and then how do you feel that they proved their thesis statement, or did they not prove their thesis statement? Look at how they did that, because the thesis is really what you're building your project around. And it should be a statement that's easy to find and provable. That's what I'm thinking.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up, any questions out there? Well, just things on your mind. Where you're at. Any just questions that we can throw out there, and maybe we've got an answer, maybe we don't. We can come up with something. But any questions out there that are just swimming around and that you're thinking about? All right, so if you have questions along the way, I will be monitoring the Google Classroom page all the time. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Hopefully a 24-hour loop is kind of the norm, but I'll get back to you as soon as possible when I catch wind of a question or something like that. I'm thinking next week, Wednesday, we'll regroup and see where we're at in terms of narrowing down, right, the thesis statements and starting to come up with some research, okay? Because that's where we need to be headed. Now, again, don't forget, anything that you research, make sure you're documenting where you got it from, because that's going to help with your annotated bibliography. How are you using it, right? That kind of stuff. And then the other thing is just writing down the process, right? How your thesis has evolved over time, how your topic idea has evolved over time, where you're finding good information, who's been helpful to you, those kinds of things, right? So in the Google Classroom, I think I posted the document of resources. The other thing that I would say is go through the rule book on nhd.org. Start looking at that. So if you're like, well, I think I'm going to create an exhibit, there are specifics with the exhibit, and you're going to want to know that stuff before you start building anything, okay? How long should your documentary be, right? Those kinds of things. And generally, it's like 10 minutes. But again, there's going to be specifics that you want to make sure that you're following along with that. So at the very least, get on nhd.org. There's a lot of videos out there that'll help you just kind of, start putting together all the info that I've thrown at you today. And it'll just be more specific for you, okay? But other than that, I really don't have anything else for you except that I will get you a specific time. Is the Zoom working? What do you guys think about that? Is this preferred? Okay. So I'll put out the next Zoom, and maybe we'll do it after the school day. I think probably would be the most logical time. So I'll put it out there. If you've got any issues whatsoever with being able to make it, just shoot me a note, even on Google Classroom, that says, hey, that time doesn't work, and we'll see if we can do some adjusting, okay? But that's really where we're headed. I'm super excited. And I'll post this video on Google Classroom as well. So Miriam, I know you jumped in late, no worries. You'll be able to get a look at what we talked about, and at any point in time, if you've got questions, don't hesitate, okay? But with that, I bid you all adieu. I've got another meeting here in just a second, so I'm gonna have to run. All right, I will stop.